hang on, I'm going to hold him. I've been there a couple of times now, and actually I've done a couple of sort of distance working with people on the theme of the Global Earth Exchange, because part of what I noticed was that the people who had participated the very first time started coming back to me to either ask for me to come back, or to give like sort of tips. So for instance, in between my visits, one of the ladies was having a particularly hard time at the actual gate of the fracking site, and so she just walked away, and she made a really beautiful wheel out of twigs and leaves and things like that she'd found on the ground. And another one had was really connecting to a kestrel that kept on coming onto the site, and so it was like I became just a sort of a core presence distantly. So even though so there were times when I would actually go on to the site, but actually I'm finding more and more that I'm almost like it's just the fact that they can connect with me and contact me even if I can't be on site, is really quite a lovely part of this whole thing, and they're familiar with it. You know, I'm not really suggesting anything that hasn't been done before in the Global Earth Exchange kind of format. So because they are because they're quite familiar with the format, it's like it's giving them a real sense of comfort. But the gazing thing, now I read your article, and I tried it. I just tried it myself. I didn't get a chance to go onto site, but I tried it myself, and I did find it really, really hard, because actually I found that I was noticing quite a lot. It was quite an active thing to do. So I tried lying down and just looking at the sky, or just gazing at the sky, if you know what I mean. And so it was like, so I allowed my eyes to sort of unfocus, and for me it felt easier to do it lying down, because then I felt that my eyes, it's almost like this, it's the other part of gazing is sort of the thing that you can do when you're not looking. And for me, I found that just sort of turning my eyes off by looking at the sky was the best way to do it. Yes. So that's my sort of thing in a nutshell.
That's
Sorry,
wonderful.
the other ones turned up.
So you really have become, I mean, you really are Earth ambassadoring, and
yeah,
it's wonderful that this group was so taken by what you did with them in June that they've really found ways to continue it.
Yes, yeah.
Really
I think.
encouraging.
I mean, it's. Do you know what? Yesterday, I really was absolutely at the end of my emotional strength about it all. I think particularly yesterday that the fracking site had seen the drill, the very high drill thing had arrived on site, that the police had been particularly tricky yesterday, and I was texting somebody who had been actually quite physically thrown about by the police, and she'd been grabbed quite painfully by the arm. And so I was in contact with her yesterday, and I rang her this morning to give her, and she actually asked for like, how can you help me? Literally, it was like, how can you help? I've really gone through it today. You can have, yes, go on and off you go. You know, what can I do? I feel really awful, you know. And it was that sort of thing today. I was just like, you know, go and make more art, go and just walk the fields. It's autumn, you know, there's things that have fallen down, you know, the earth. Sometimes being a human isn't enough. You know, sometimes you just have to just get away from the whole situation and just hurt, you know, just hurt. And when, you know, when you feel ready to sort of create again, just create with mushy leaves and rotten bits of twigs, and you know, and I felt really almost like, oh, I just can't bear what's going on in that situation at the moment. And I know that it's just the same story. So many people who are fighting any kind of established sense of fracking or water or whatever it is, you know, but it wasn't nice at all to have these just people, you know. So I just felt really glad that I could hold the ambassador work and just sort of say, well, you know, do these things. Do you remember when you came to this? Do you remember we did this? Why don't you go off and just do that on your own? And it felt really just like I could at least give them something.
Yeah. I just wonder if anybody else. Well, no, maybe let's share our things, our stories first, and then we can. It'd be nice to be able to give feedback to one another as well. But let's do the sharing part first.
Well, I've got nothing else to say, so I'll really love to just listen at this point. So
okay, thank you.
I'll mute now.
Well, maybe I'll speak while I'm not coughing. I have a cold, and I'm kind of fuzzy in the head, and I'm feeling like this is a calm moment. So maybe I'll talk while I can. As some of you may remember, I'm living in a community that has been fracked and is being fracked, and has been identified as the community in the area in the country where they are probably going to relocate all of the gas and petrochemical center from Houston and Louisiana on the Gulf to this region where I live in Pennsylvania. And it'll probably include some of where Janet is as well in West Virginia, and then in Ohio, another state next to us. So the place that I didn't want to choose this place for the practice. I had such a resistance. I wanted to choose something different, but this is so central to me in the last 6 years and the community. So it's the actual site where the petrochemical plant is being constructed, which is along the Ohio River. And so the physicality of the place, it used to be another zinc smelter plant, and then they totally leveled it. And they took all the contaminated soil and they piled 7 feet of clean soil on top of it. So from a physical point of view, they made the ground go to nothing. And this is a little historically I'm talking about. This was last year. But underneath, I'm aware, is all this contaminated soil from the prior company that they didn't choose to clean up. So there's nothing growing there because they totally leveled the land. And along the river, they took out all these trees, and they took the entire hillside of trees and bulldozed them. And so this is 400 acre space of like bare flat, and they're now laying cement. And so, Trebi, you talked about the gazing. I can't gaze without wincing. I can't gaze without judgment. And I'm finding it difficult to just gaze without emotion. I really was trying to focus on the physical, and it's very hard. And it's hard for me talking about it now because it's so huge and intertwined, as all of our places probably will be. So I know that I see plants that And I know what they did with the plants. They put in all these species that were considered native to the area to appeal to the people who complained that they wiped out all these plants. So I'm even feeling that judgment and that cynicism as I'm looking at along the river. They put some trees and shrubs and wildflowers in, and I can't even gaze at them or look at them without some sort of anger and cynicism. So I probably failed at the beginning of this practice in terms of gazing, and yet I'm not judging myself in this because it is what it is, you know. It's a powerful location, and it's right on the bridge where the major highway crosses over along the river across from this beautiful bucolic town. And, you know, it's this major industrial site being expanded in a tiny little community. So it's really hard not to react. And so what I am, you know, what's going to grow there, what I was thinking about and what I was noticing were the birds. The birds don't care whether they're landing on high tension wires. Well, I don't know what the birds care about, but they look like they land just as easily on garbage heap and flat cement and a beautiful green tree. So what I was appreciating was just observing the birds and watching them from the distance, of course, and noticing that no matter what's happened there, the birds are still there, and I don't know what other wildlife might be there because I am across the river a little far away. So I think I'll just leave it there. Like I said, I feel like it was a difficult practice to do and that I chose a difficult location, but I'm not so sure any location isn't going to be difficult, because in its woundedness, there's a part of me that can't separate that. I can't just purely put it in the physical observational realm because it is part of me. So that's very hard to do. And I appreciate trying to do it too. Kind of like what Harriet said, you know, there were people there, and you know, I just got intertwined with the landscape and the story, even though I wasn't supposed to. So I'll leave it there. And if we have time for feedback, I'm open to any. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Joanne.
It might be a good time for me to talk a little bit about my place and my experience. I actually went down to the Ohio River in Huntington it's called David Harris Riverfront Park. And that's where we had our event this past summer. And it's readily accessible for one thing. And while the actual fracking again is just one of the many abuses of this poor river. And fracking, and then the plans that Joanne expressed, the proposed Appalachian storage hub, and all those things are a great concern. But the river itself, when I was with the river, I had feelings of, and by with it, I was sitting on a bench and just kind of being there. But I was also taking notes because when I observe things, I like to write it down so I don't. There might be something that comes to me later when I look back. But the two times that I went, and the river at that particular place is heavily used by people, recreation and enjoyment, and which makes it kind of an ideal location, I think, for possible education and gatherings and all of those things, because people have been coming there for a long time. The river, probably at that spot 25 years ago, we didn't have this riverfront park. And we have a flood wall that separated Huntington from the river, because in 1937 there was a horrendous flood. And so there is this flood wall, but now they have built on the other side of the flood wall, which is great. Playgrounds, boating access. And so when I'm down there, I saw lots of things, human activity, boaters, anglers. I would never eat those fish. Children playing, there's playgrounds, there are people who walk. They have festivals there. That particular day, mostly it was boaters and anglers and people just coming down to throw breadcrumbs or something to the mallards. There are a lot of mallards there. And I watched, I looked a lot. I didn't gaze, I looked a lot. And I noted, like, what all do I see? The things that were obvious disturbances where, you know, people have across the river built things to prevent erosion. I mean, the river itself, it's not free flowing anymore. So it's like a big series of ponds and, you know, watching the barges go up and down the river. But one of the things that struck me was sitting there when I looked either direction, like beyond where I was sitting, like not just in front of me, but as far as I could see, either direction, it looks beautiful. And there's something about that. I don't know what that means, but it's like, that's the river. You know, that's the river that I want to see, that river that I can't see. So that sounds ridiculous, but
yeah, no,
but it is. It's like, you know, I could see the bridge that went across it, you know, and the river is a connector. And trying to think of the ways it connects people, and it has for thousands of years here, long before we invaded. But then there was life, and it was thriving, but not like it could, right? I would see little pockets of nature where things were doing well, and especially, you know, beyond I couldn't get up close and see, but I could tell that was a much more natural habitat. But even where I sat, I watched a lot of pollinators, and whether it was, you know, bees carrying heavy loads of pollen, or wasps, or butterflies, and even monarchs. And I thought, you know, I wish I could get out of my head, but I have a hard time getting out of my head. And I thought about how our work can be, we can be like pollinators and, you know, carry the stories and carry, hopefully, the joy of the place as opposed to the woundedness, or try to think about how we can celebrate that beautiful place. It, you know, it serves over 3 million people, that river, and, you know, from starting in Pittsburgh, going all the way to Cairo, Illinois. And it's vast, but it has been an accumulation of, you know, several hundreds of years of abuse and indifference. And I think, you know, as I sat there, I felt some fear. And then I actually felt some actual fear, and I felt some discomfort because the place has become a gathering place. And sadly, in our city, it's not always a gathering place for the most, I don't know, for people that you feel real comfortable around. I'll put it that way. And at one point, a small bunch of dogs came out of the woods, and I had my dog with me, and I got really uncomfortable, but I just stood up and got really big and told them no, and they went away. But there's a kind of a feeling of dread and fear, and I'm not sure how to deal with that. Maybe I, you know, like Joanne, I know too much about what they're proposing, but even what's already there in that water and in those sediments and in those fish, you know, is enough to make me, you know, feel a little bit, I would never eat the fish, let's put it that way. I have lots of notes. I saw lots of things thriving. You know, the ducks are thriving because people are paying attention to them. And that in a way is a bit of hope, because if we pay attention to things and we learn to appreciate them, you know, people didn't gather down there before they had a place to gather. And they certainly didn't notice the ducks, but people come down there now with their kids. And that's the sort of thing, you know, that could be a healing a healing thing for the river. So I could go on, and I'm not going to. I'm going to stop. I've started looking. I will say this. While I felt guarded, I also felt attracted at the same time, and I think that may be the case. I think people are attracted to water courses, and for whatever reason, maybe it's because we're mostly water, our bodies. So sounds, sights, there was so much there going on, both natural and unnatural. And one of the nicest things that happened was when I left the second time, a woodchuck ran across the rocks. And it's like, I've never seen a woodchuck there. So full of surprises down there.
Thanks, Janet. That's great.
Thank you. I waited till last because actually I did this before our last call and I shared it on the last call, but it's been a little bit ago, so I just looked it over, and the thing that really jumped out at me was this sense of kind of the side I've chosen is one that's a kind of a little cemented in river and spring in town, and it's an area that gets flooded a lot, and that some people would like to make it so that the spring is, is just more honored and more of a central point as a spring, and not as it is now, which is just sort of cemented in so that kids don't fall in or something like that. So, but the thing of my notes that jumped out at me was just this sense of kind of a suppressed grief and this feeling of, well, it's not so bad. It's okay. What's all the fuss about? And that just really connects for me as to the way that the thing that I find myself up against in the human world with dealing with flood, and in our area is way less developed than any of where you live. But in my work with dealing with the flood, I'm getting a lot more aware of things that are kind of on the wings, waiting to come in as more development pressure comes in. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what more to say because it's been quite a while. I did the second one also. I guess I was kind of a month ahead, but then it's not unlike me. I jump in really fast, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I end first. So.
Well, I think it would be great to hear some feedback about this. And for me, lots of things came up. And one of the things that I realized was that that gazing at a wounded place is different from gazing at a place or going to a place and looking at a place that's in the process of being hurt, which is what you described, Joanne, and what your friends described, and what you all described, really. It's really a different thing. It's when I first started writing about gazing, it had to do with spending a week in a clear-cut forest in British Columbia. But that's a place that's still, and that it still has the majesty, and there's stuff rising up. But it is painful. It's very painful to look at a place that's undergoing damage. So that was one thing that came up. And then another thing was that, this group in England that Harriet went to and brought the Earth Exchange to them in June, and how they're really, it obviously made a huge impact on them, that they've continued the practice in certain ways, and they're also seeking guidance about it. So those are just a few things off of the top of my head that came up when I was listening to these stories. And the stories are wonderful. They're so deep, and they bring in so much observation. And I'm in the final stages of finishing my book, and I suspect that some of this conversation might sneak into it. So it would be great to hear some feedback from others on one or all of what we've just heard.
Trevi, you're not going to tell us of your place or your observation?
Yes. Yes, sorry.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I actually had an interesting experience because I started going to a gas fracking site, and unlike ones I've tried to get onto before, which are on private land and quite inaccessible. And then, and I've gotten chased off, and I've tried to take pictures, and they run and they don't like that. But this one is right on it's just a couple hundred feet off the road. And there's another little country road just sort of opposite. So I've been going and sitting, driving my car and sitting at the edge of this little road and just watching and not bringing my camera. And I've had so much antipathy and hatred of the gas fracking sites for the last 8 years that I hate everything. I mean, I just bear this hatred. I hate the trucks. I hate the drivers. I hate the noise. I mean, it's just this vehement dislike. And so the interesting thing that happened to me is I was sitting at this place, and I went several times because I just couldn't. I didn't want to call attention to myself, so I did it in several different occasions instead of just one. And was that I started to get interested. I started to get interested in what they were doing, because I was really looking at all the equipment and the boxes and the height and the pipes and all this stuff. And I actually went home one day and looked up on the internet to try and see if I could figure out what all this stuff is. And then I started having a fantasy about going over there and asking one of the people to explain to me what they were doing. So that was a completely unexpected, and I must say, not entirely welcome response. There's a big part of me that just sort of wants to keep totally hating them and not letting in any sort of whiff of curiosity or interest or appreciation for their technical expertise to sneak in. So that was my experience with that.
Trevi, that instantly makes me ask a question, that your experience and your whole understanding of that process over the last 8 years maybe would be able to shed light on, because one of the things that seems to be getting worse, the fracking site, basically, a bit of history, when they put out a public consultation about it, and the planning authority initially put out the planning application, there was a large majority of people in the area voted against it, and the council itself voted against it. But then three of the head councillor and two others actually vetoed the council vote and approved it. And because we've got a Conservative government, the government also approved it, even though it was a minority council vote. And it's gone ahead completely against the community's wishes. And when you look at the demographic of the people actually at the gate, watching this actual infrastructure going in on these trucks, they are just normal people from the community, a music teacher, mothers, dads, farmers. There was a massive protest last week of farmers against fracking in the area because it's a beautiful rural agricultural area. But what is happening over and over and over again is there's no sort of scientific level, there's a lot of very, very knowledgeable people about the actual science of fracking and the law about environmental law, but the people on the ground are just not able to get to that point of mutual curiosity, because the police and the security and the people, the subcontractors, like the trucks who've been subcontracted to bring in the stuff, are just literally, they're aggressive. They're aggressive, and they everything that the sort of more organized protesters and the activists have been trained to do is to do everything with non-violence. Real non-violence. They've been trained how to just be passive when they've been told to move by the police or whatever. But so anyway, my question is, the beauty sometimes is such a human thing, and when they're at the front line and they're met with the ugliest bit of humanity, how do they keep strong, and how do they keep looking for the beauty in the people?
Yeah, good question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that maybe they can't find the beauty in the people and in the situation at that stage, but they can keep on being the beauty. You know, like
There you go.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that that's such an important thing that I keep on saying to them, you know, that just, you know, because they're like, you know, the police are literally grabbing them, bruising them, yanking them out the way. A tea lady who is 79 years old 2 days ago, who'd been making tea for the police as well as the protectors, was grabbed and taken off the verge of the road by the police. And it's, and you know, she's the epitome of non-violent protest, you know, making cups of tea.
Really?
But
What are you talking
so
about,
yeah,
Mama?
it's like
Mama, what are you
constant. We're talking about the fracking site. Do you remember when we went to the fracking site? Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, and it's just to keep you are yes, to keep them remembering that they have the capacity to be love, to show it. It's very, very hard.
yeah,
When all they really want to do is just shout and swear and
yeah.
you know, call them awful names.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a really tricky one.
Well, you know, it's interesting you said that what they really want to do is shout and call them names, and I hear that, and I heard what Sasha said about suppressed grief.
Yeah.
And that those are like the two extremes. And, you know, I wonder if we as humans, many of us, either learn one extreme or the other. Either we suppress our grief or we repress our feelings, or they're out of control in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because there's such intensity that we're experiencing it, I, speaking for myself, sometimes there's not a model for that, really, you know? I mean, there's, at least not in my life, there wasn't. There was a lot of angry expression when things were displeasing. So, I just really, I wrote that down when Sasha talked about the suppressed grief.
Yeah.
There's something that I wanted to say too as feedback to everybody, really, but specifically related to Janet's site. There's something I'm feeling very tender about Janet being on kind of the other end of the same river that I'm on. And so, you know, as far apart as we are geographically, and we're not that far apart, but we're connected by this body of water, and we're all connected in lots of ways. But there's something that I'm, in all the activist work that I'm doing here, I'm very aware of the people downstream. So when Janet, you know, you said today that you went to the Ohio River, you know, I felt this little jump in my heart. It was like, oh yes, because it's all those people that I've been thinking about, you know, when we've been talking at these meetings about the contamination of the water and stuff. So, so I'm appreciating that connectivity. And also noticing that it seems like we've all chosen, well, Sasha's was not a fracking site. It was a cement spring in town. So, yeah. So I think I'm going to mute myself and listen more.
Yeah, other reflections on some of these experiences.
Yes, I'd like to speak. You know, it's interesting about the Ohio River. Cairo, Illinois is not very far from me. So my ears also like kind of lit up a little bit when I thought, oh, I'll have to go visit Cairo and think of us all. So yeah, it's a pretty amazing place. And I don't know, I definitely had responses when everybody was talking, but yeah, just a lot of emotion as I hear what you all are dealing with. And one thought that passed through my mind as I was just at a large, not a large for us, an ecological gathering that I help to organize every year, and that was this weekend. And coming into it's a great event, but you hear so much, and you're with people who are really grieving a lot about the things that are happening. And I kept saying to people, you know, really our main challenge is not to be discouraged. And when I came home, you know, really that was one of the big things I'm kind of trying to process, is that, whoa, that you know, that sense of how much there is to do, how fast it needs to be done, and what's actually happening. So, and as I took my walk today, it's the third day, so things are starting to settle down some. One of the things, I have some other practices that I use to try to integrate some of this, but one of the things I felt during one of these practices, well, at least I have some skill in grieving. So, because I do find when I can grieve my way through things, and I can get present, and another thing I thought of when Harriet spoke of the intense emotions, all of you, I sort of feel that like one of the advantages is for me of being a part of this group is that, let me try to mute this. Is that I can see these things coming, but they're not at the scale that they're at where you all are at. And that I often think that in the work I do, that maybe I can be kind of a pebble upstream that diverts some of this to whatever extent I'm able. And there's some really good people working our community. And one of the things I've been really insisting, we've got some good grant money because of the flood. And I've really been insisting that, or imploring that we get some really good facilitation training, and that we really address the communication issues in our community. It's a small community, and I have got people on board with that. And the woman who's doing it, she's very go-getter, enthusiastic, and she said, we're going to train so we can facilitate in a war zone. And I know we don't need that. And somebody else said, well, who knows, you might. And so I did think of that with Harriet, is that there are, you know, it's not a part of our practice at the moment, but it's something perhaps to contemplate, is that there are different ways, different groups who train facilitators to actually go and facilitate between people who are actually at war with each other.
Wow.
And it really sounds like the sort of thing that you are experiencing at this fracking site. And it has everything to do with listening and trying to hear people who are just, you know, have such incredibly strong feelings. And so that was one thing that I thought of. And another thing also with Harriet is I'm getting really involved in local politics because of the flood, and learning a lot of things that I could have probably lived to the end of my life without knowing, just quite happily. But that you all have been dealing with for a long time. And the story you told about your city council is very interesting, because we had what we're calling kind of a coup at our long-term recovery committee. And it was led, probably it was set up in advance to try to maintain a certain status quo of power. And one of the person who led it was a member of the city council, and he did it by attacking a dissenting view and saying that city council was behind him. But I took it on myself. I had an opening to communicate with another city council member, and he was like, you know, how many people from city council were there? Just one? No, that wasn't our view. So it's quite interesting to hear that about your city council. And I don't know where we're going with this, I have no idea, but at this point, things are not so, they're not so, how do you say it, inflammable, or, they're not so hot that we can't maybe lay down some tracks for better communication. I don't know, but that's my hope, and that's what I'm best at. I'm best at connecting and communicating with people, and trying to give a nudge in the direction I want things to go. So.
Well, there's so much great stuff being said on this call. I wish we had like 4 days to talk to one another.
This is Janet. Could I make one comment and then I'll be quiet? Yeah, I was just, when I think about our river here and the issues here, I mean, the overriding concern is, like, if you come to the river and you sit there and you don't know, you just don't know all the impacts that are already in process. Much of what's happening around fracking is out of sight. And you know how we are as humans. And so my overriding concern is that people aren't going to know, and people aren't going to know what hit that river until people start getting really sick because of all the stuff in the river, and whatever form it takes. And so that the big challenge here, like in a municipality in Huntington and a tri-state area, is that you have a place that's crying for economic development, and you know how the frackers are, the gas people are. It's all about jobs, and that's politicians. It's all about jobs. So people don't want to hear the bad news. They don't want to. If you just look at the river, you may not know. You just may not know that there's really there's bad stuff going on under there. And you need to do some things differently to shift the tide. So, I mean, my big concern is the fact it's like insidious. The difference between fracking and mountaintop removal is that there's one was so insidious on the surface. You could see what was happening to our mountains, but you can't see what's happening to our groundwater and what's happening to our rivers and streams as a result of all this activity. It's what's hidden that concerns me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll be quiet. So that's my pain. It really is my pain.
Yeah, and I want to ask before I'm aware we only have a few minutes left, and I want to ask Sasha, since you said you have experience in grieving, and I know you do, in helping people with grief, if you would talk a bit about that. But I wanted to mention to you, Harriet, there's a man, I wrote about it in A Radical Joy Revealed, but you might want to, are you there? Yes, you're still there. You might want to Google this man. His name is Pancho Ramos Stearley, and it's Stierle. And he was a meditator, and he was part of a group at Occupy, they were doing Occupy Wall Street. He was in Los Angeles, I think. And he was written about and covered on the media.
Can you just say his name again, please?
Yeah, Pancho, Pancho.
Yeah.
Ramos, and Stearley, Stierle.
I'm so sorry, I missed it again because Calloway's being talkative. Sorry, Pancho Ramos, R-A-M.
Stearley, and the last bit is Stearley, Stierle.
Stierle. Okay.
You can find it with
right.
all this.
Yes.
Anyhow, when the police came, he sat there. He got the whole group of them to just sit there and meditate, and smile. And they were, I think they were dragged off, but
yes,
everybody in the media noticed it. So I mean, I think that's what I mean by being the beauty. If you can't actually find it in those others. That's what can make a difference, like keeping on making art or singing. And they did that at Standing Rock too, which was one of the reasons people were so inspired by Standing Rock.
Well, you see, I think this is absolutely the thing. And, there are absolute beautiful little moments of beauty, like I was saying, the music teacher, he's been playing jigs and folk tunes to the lines of the police. Wow. And then women singing 3-part harmony, and then, you know, artists coming along, ladies crocheting and draping it everywhere, and you know, so things are grabbing the media attention, and yeah, I think it's interesting what Sasha was just saying, and just after that, it's like, I think one of there is so much grief, and sometimes grief is harder to deal with than just plain old-fashioned anger. And I think that's the danger, you know, that you know, the grief is inspiring them, because the grief is actually the same as love, but the anger is the hatred that you can feel, the simplicity of, I can blame this person. But of course, if you talk to the average policeman in North Yorkshire Police Force, he probably, you know, has real mixed feelings. He probably was one of those people who voted against it, you know. But so there's just so much mess going on, and sorry, I've gone off point again. But you know, the assumption that the mess is going to be made, that's what I picked up on. It's like environmental law, and the part of the grief is watching the destruction, watching the fact that no matter what you say, no matter what scientific evidence you back it up with, no matter how peaceful and loving, and the sort of the prophetic voice of doom, the kind of one of the big core grief feelings is they know it anyway. They know it, and they're going to do it anyway. And it's the environmental law then comes in afterwards to deal with the mess that the corporations expect, and they think in their head it's just collateral damage. And I think, you know, we're at that point in 21st century where we have amazing scientific evidence. Yeah, sure. And it's just all of that. But I keep on reminding what I actually was saying to this lady, and when I went to do the last one, was don't take it all on your own shoulders. The grief, the anger, the love, all of it, because there are cogs turning, many cogs turning, and that's a great comfort. And I think that going back to the start about gazing, sometimes gazing from a point of vulnerability is really, really hard. But maybe my next practice would be might be to say, gaze now, but cushioned in the knowledge that there's a whole load of cogs turning on your behalf.
Wow, that's great.
You know?
Yeah.
So that the gaze becomes one of love and comfort and hope.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, so the next what we're going to focus on for the next month is the part about really letting the emotions out. And I wanted to just review some of the guidelines from the previous from that section. And so some of the suggestions were: pause at the threshold until you feel ready to enter. Move forward slowly. Oh, my phone is buzzing. Noticing your feelings about penetrating deeper into the place. Spend time at different areas of the place and pay attention to your feelings at each one. You know, like whether it feels different to face north or south, east or west, or the river or the ground, like Janet was describing today about different perspectives on the river. Note whether being at this place reminds you of a personal wound or sadness in your life. Ask yourself if you have had any part in what happened to this place, not about wallowing in guilt, but about accepting our human responsibility. And allow your emotions as much free range as you can, and don't be afraid to express them out loud. And that would including with movement. And so, like I said before we close, I did want to invite you, Sasha, since you have had a lot of experience with dealing with grief and with helping others deal with it, if there would be some suggestions that you would care to make about going forth into this next bit.
Well, I did quickly try and think, well, what would be a short soundbite to say? there are a couple of resources that I really have relied on, have been very helpful to me. But both of them bring you through a process that ends in a forgiveness. And what is interesting in both of the resources I'm thinking about is that both of them say we really kind of have forgotten what is the process that leads us through forgiveness. It isn't just saying I want to forgive or I don't. There's an actual kind of steps that you go through. So, you know, that's very much in a soundbite, and maybe we would talk about it more. And don't just go there, but like what you were talking about, Trebi, of sitting there and like actually starting to get curious. Like what's happening? Or Harriet saying, you know, these policemen, they probably voted against it. That's not the process of healing, but that's, I think, where the hope is. Or even like facilitating in war zones where people are going to be expressing extremely strong feelings. Maybe their family members have been killed, or, you know, their homes have been destroyed. I mean, we're talking extreme situations, but there are people who are able, through very structured processes, to allow communication and healing to happen. So I think that's basically what I have to say in a very short term, is that just like we're having some processes as ambassadors to connect with the sites, there are processes that are spelled out and that I found when I follow them can lead through some of the most difficult of feelings and end up in forgiveness, which is to say that we are no longer fixated on our anger and our desire for revenge. So.
Thank you. And could you tell us the names of the books?
One that I really like is called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And I could turn around and see if I can find it on the shelf. I can't remember the title, but it's a step-by-step thing that they recommend you do with another person. And it includes something called a loss graph, which I found super effective, and then a process that leads to forgiveness. And so it's the Grief Recovery Handbook. And the other one is that I'm really involved in a practice that's called Avatar, and there's a mini course on forgiveness.
What's it called?
The practice I'm a part of is called Avatar, and it's a group that works. Our aim is to create an enlightened planetary civilization. So, you know, I mean, just a very small thing. But anyway, it's a lot of practices of working with our mind so that we can deliberately create what we want. So in a circumstance, we can decide, okay, boy, this is easy to get mad, but I'm going to choose to stay engaged in a different way. But it's quite an extensive practice with quite a bit of training. But there is just a mini course on forgiveness that I have found to be very effective. And I think it can help. It's nice to you really probably need someone to guide you through it if you're not doing Avatar. But you can do it in a couple of hours and really handle some big stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's just conclude. We're 4 minutes after the hour. So we said we were going to end at the hour, but let's just conclude with maybe 3 words from everybody about what this call leaves you with and how you go forward. And I'm just going to say, let's do it according to who's where on my screen, which would be Joanne, Harriet, Sasha, Janet, and me.
I would close with self-compassion.
Be not discouraged.
I'm not sure who's next.
You're next.
Oh, sorry. 3 words. Nervous about the size of the task, and just keep focusing on your next step.
Janet?
Yeah, diving into the depths. Whew.
Okay, mine are inspired, slightly overwhelmed. So I'm going to suggest that we consider having our next meeting on November 15th, which is a Wednesday at the same time. And if we could all just plot that in there, we'd all know about it in advance.
That works for me.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Good.
Can I ask a quick question just for the next one?
Sure.
Just to possibly, Trevi, if you don't mind, just to consider winter is coming.
Uh-huh.
That would be really helpful to, I don't know, just to sort of talk to you all about grief and the earth and activism during winter time.
Yeah.
I'd really appreciate that.
So you want it? We made you. Would you suggest that we do that on the next call before we talk about the practice? We could do that.
Obviously the practice needs to be addressed, but I just feel like the more I communicate with you guys over the last year, especially, you've just got such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I just feel that it would be really beneficial for my experience with my Global Earth Exchange fracking guys that I just thought I'd put it there just to see whether there's something that can come up.
Definitely, and in fact,
Okay,
I think
thank
that's
you.
really important. And in fact, it could be that I don't know. Maybe there's another solution, because I'm sure that other people, as different things come up and there are things you really want to discuss, that we should be able to. We should make time for that for sure. Whether it's maybe we have more than one call a month. Who knows?
I love that. I love that we have the ability to have a container, but also that we have the ability to kind of let a little water splash in and out of that container and go with the flow. So let's make some space for Harriet's inquiry and maybe keep it open for whenever we each have something. We can always make time for something, I think.
Yeah, and we need to.
I'm also wondering, could we not answer her make a few suggestions or answer her by email?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, please do just whatever comes to you. Thank you.
We're allowed to talk in between, I think.
Yeah.
We can do that.
We could just start just a little email exchange. I don't know how many people would have something to say, but probably it wouldn't take that much to inspire just some of your own ideas.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yes, great.
Definitely. Yeah, we're allowed to talk between sessions. We're not locked up on the screen here.
Mm-hmm.
Trevi, how soon do you get on a call before the call begins? 5 minutes?
Yeah, usually about 5 minutes, sometimes more.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to try to do that next time so that I can figure this out. It drives me crazy.
Okay.
But I don't like technology getting the best of me.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, Jenna, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, everybody. Great
All right.
call.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.